All right, the question we had hanging for about a week is how does Shaeffer represent a hybrid between traditional evidential and presuppositional apologetics? Right? Now it comes back to you. Somewhere in that 20% of the brain that is in the class right now, somewhere in that 20% is this conversation, right? Got it. So, Joe, if you were to try to give me as rapidly as possible and as trenchantly as possible the basic view represented by evidential apologetics with respect to the task of the apologist, what would it be? What is the apologist trying to do if that apologist is evidential?
An evidential argument is usually trying to use, facts like a teleological argument, which argues from design, and it's trying to show how, because there's design in nature, there must be a designer, something like that, arguing kind of empirical evidence for the existence of God.
Okay, that's right. All of that is correct. And so now I'm wanting to kind of get philosophical. And so what's going on philosophically if an apologist is going to make that appeal to design? What is he assuming with respect to his relationship to the person he's trying to persuade there? He's assuming what about that person? So here we have design. You know, he shows them a flower. Look at that flower, isn't it beautiful? It's well designed, isn't it? And he's expecting the pagan to say what with respect to that question? You're the pagan, I'm the Christian. Here's a tulip.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I say, hey, Mr. Pagan, see that tulip?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't you agree it really is well designed?
No.
Yeah, see? Well, see. You might play ball. But that's because you're objecting to the notion of it being designed. But what I'm assuming, if I'm an evidentialist, is that what with respect to this notion of design? I'm not letting you off the hook quite yet here.
Okay.
I'm assuming what when I ask you that question?
Well, but I agree it's design.
Okay. We at least, go ahead, Jacob, I think you're trying to say it, right? Or you were about to say it.
Will you assume a common conception of reason and reality?
Yeah. I assume a common ground. Evidentialism assumes common ground with the pagan. It assumes that if I show the pagan a watch, we can both agree that this watch was designed and that I can correlate from a designed watch to a designed flower to something like that. And so, evidentialism believes that if I can get this person to agree to that common, neutral territory between us, then I can lead him by inexorable reason from that point where we agree to God. Therefore, end of syllogism, God is. The pagan goes, I see it, I repent. And there you go. You've got a convert there. And so that's the task. That's what the evidentialist is trying to do. Presuppositionalism, so common ground, let's put that here. Common ground. Presuppositionalism says no, can't be any common ground. There's two universes. The universe of darkness, the universe of light. There's nothing in between. It's a gulf fixed. And so if I go shopping around for common ground with the pagan, I'm not going to find anything. His idea of design and my idea of design are light years apart. And so even if he uses the word design, even if he agrees that it's designed, and I think I've got common ground with him, what he's going to finally reach at the end of his reasoning process is an idol, not God, not the God of the Bible. He'll reach something like maybe Aristotle's God or some other perverse distortion of the true God. Therefore, it's useless and worthless to even attempt to run down this path of an evidential approach based on a hypothetical common ground with the pagan. The presuppositionalist says instead, this guy has to get into my moccasins. You know, he's got to jump into my shoes, he's got to walk in my path, and I say to him, if you will assume the God of the Bible, if you will assume the infallibility of the Scriptures, if you will step into my shoes and see the world through my eyes, then you will immediately recognize the truth of the Christian faith. But you've got to jump over to my side to do it. You have to presuppose it. That was Van Til's basic approach, you see. And so the evidentialist accuses the presuppositionalist of begging the question. It's a logical fallacy. By the way, you commonly hear this phrase abused in our culture. People will say, well, the situation that I'm looking at here really begs the question of whether or not such and so. You ever heard it used that way? What they mean by that would be it raises the question, and, you know, kind of asks the question, but not begs the question. Begging the question, as you all know, because you've taken logic, is a fallacy of circular reasoning. Begging the question means begging from the person I'm speaking to the conclusion I'm trying to get him to reach, you know. So that's why the term is used. So be careful to use that the right way, which has nothing to do with my immediate conversation with you. That's a pet peeve of mine. People do that. But this is what the evidentialists would say. You're begging, this is circular reasoning. This is like logical fallacies 101. Sure, if they presuppose your position, they're going to reach your conclusions. Duh. You know, what's up with that? You know, if I assume the Bible is the Word of God and then conclude the Bible is the Word of God, well, okay, fine. But that doesn't really represent sound reasoning. Sound reasoning is when we begin with premises to which we can both agree and reach conclusions that we may or may not have expected from them. And the debate goes on. There has tended to be, in the history of this debate, a little bit of a theological divide as well. I think you're probably aware of this. Presuppositionalists have tended to be Calvinistic. For example, Van Til was at Westminster Seminary, which is a Calvinistic seminary. Bonson, one of the most well-known presuppositional apologists, you know, of the more modern era, was a thoroughgoing Calvinist. Calvinism has tended to be associated with it because they believe, in a sense, that the only way you can make these correct presuppositions is based on God's changing your heart and so on. So they want to preach the gospel and get, in a sense, presuppositions in you that are correct based on God's grace. Evidentialism has tended to be associated with Arminianism and an idea that I can, by sweet reason, persuade someone to faith. So evidentialism has also been associated with Roman Catholic thought because Thomas Aquinas was a bit of an evidentialist, wasn't he? You have Augustine over here, a favorite of the Protestants. Aquinas over here, more of a favorite of the Catholics. Part of the reason Francis Schaeffer doesn't like Thomas Aquinas is because he's a Catholic. And Francis Schaeffer's a Calvinist. You know, so just keep your eye on that ball. I think Francis Schaeffer wrongly has absorbed some of the animosity that he picked up studying under Van Til toward that whole sort of Thomistic approach, and you sort of see it dripping from his writings, even though I love Francis Schaeffer. As you know, that's still my little critique of it. Right? Shaeffer, however, to his credit, and I think partly because he was a practical apologist, he was out there trying to actually do it in the real world, decided that both sides have something to offer. And so he came up with this that he considers to be a kind of a hybrid third alternative. And the best way, by the way, I think it's a pretty effective approach. But his approach goes something like this. Here is a person. And here are all the things this person believes. Here are all the beliefs. So let's say I'm dealing with an atheist. You don't think there's a God in heaven? No, I don't. We're just here by random accident. Just a happenstance of the universe. That's correct. And so really our lives ultimately, though they may have a little bit of short-term meaning to them, are ultimately going to end in nothingness. That's right. Man is a grown-up germ, sitting on the cog of a vast cosmic machine, destined for annihilation. Right? Right. I've talked to people that way. And that's what they would say. I had a lawyer friend once. Thoroughgoing atheist, communist. I think a card-carrying Marxist the guy was. Went to law school with him. And more than once we had conversations along these lines. You know. And I never really got very far with him. I tried, but he was so good. He was as good a lawyer as I was, and we just sort of would, you know, sort of posture with each other. But there was another guy I had a conversation like this with who went to seminary. He was a fellow that, you know, grew up in a Presbyterian church and felt the call of God to go into ministry. Went to seminary. As it turns out, he went to the most liberal seminary in the Presbyterian Church, USA. San Anselmo, situated just outside of San Francisco. This was quite a few years ago. He went in as a Christian. He'd done Young Life, he'd done all this stuff, you know. He was in seminary for 1.5 years, and he dropped out, an atheist. And he'd been an atheist for about 25 to 30 years when I had this conversation with him. So watch out for seminary. It'll cure you of your Christianity, you know, so you need to be careful, depending on where you go to seminary. So I was talking with him one afternoon over lunch. I didn't know he was an atheist. He was a wonderful musician, and we had done music together in various churches and stuff. You know, he's a wonderful. He'd at one time been a nightclub musician, and he was just wonderful, just wonderful. And so we'd done several different kind of gigs along the way, you know. And so I just kind of assumed that because most of what we had done was in a religious context, that he, you know, shared my faith, at least in some general way. We had this conversation once, and I said, hey, you know, I've been asked to play over at this such and so place. You want to join me in this deal? And he said, no. I said, no? What kind of answer is that? You know? What do you mean, no? And he said, no, I don't think I can do this anymore. He says, I feel like too much of a hypocrite. A hypocrite? What are you talking about, a hypocrite? He said, well, you probably don't know this about me, but I'm an atheist. Atheist? What? You know, I can't believe it. He's telling me this stuff. And he had been very much disturbed because the last time we played at my church, at the church we both attended, and the pastor had made a comment later in writing that this music we had done had for him been a very spiritual experience. And I sort of read it, and I read it, thought, oh, that's nice. He was so troubled by that because it was so inconsistent with his own beliefs that there is no such thing as a spiritual experience, that he felt like he was being a hypocrite to keep doing this music with me, and so he wasn't going to do it anymore. You follow me? He said, well, wait a minute. Let's look at this. So this gave us a whole opportunity for a philosophical discussion. You feel like a hypocrite, you know, for doing music. And you feel like a hypocrite because you're an atheist. Now let's think about this for a minute. What is hypocrisy when you're an atheist? And we played around with this for a while. We had, you know, quite a conversation in which I was attempting, and I think I did succeed, although he didn't repent. He didn't fall on his knees right there in the restaurant or anything like that. And I really don't know to this day exactly where he is, but he did start going back to church, so I at least take some comfort in that. He's over in Seattle now, so I haven't seen him for a while. But the whole thrust of our argument was to say this. Here you have certain ideas in your head. For example, the idea of being a hypocrite. You love your wife. You had a beautiful wife and a lovely family. You love your wife. You love your children. Those are meaningful to you. Those give you some sense of purpose, don't they? You know, and he was willing to buy off on all that. And then I kept trying to impress on him that if he's an atheist, that the meaning of those things is no more than the meaning of saying so much love or value among grasshoppers or ants or amoebas or slugs. Because if you're an atheist, that's really all you amount to, isn't it? You see? And he got very frustrated with me because I kept trying to show him that all these things that he viewed as significant were ultimately and could only be ultimately insignificant and meaningless and pure accident and just really a delusion, a vapor. You know. Your love for your wife, it's meaningless. It has no meaning. It's no more meaningful than one, germ loving another germ. That's all you are. You're a germ. If I were to squash you right now, it'd be no great loss to the universe, because what are you? Francis Schaeffer, I think, would endorse that, and he'd say that's this hybrid approach. The hybrid approach, this is what he calls taking the lid off or taking the roof off. You have to shop around inside the life of the person that you're dealing with who claims to have something other than a Christian outlook. And this is not for an atheist, it could be for an Islamic person or whatever. Find that point where their own philosophy contradicts itself, you see. In other words, Shaeffer says, everybody has a little bit of Christian truth in them. Otherwise, they couldn't stand to exist. They cling to that. They cling to something that gives them meaning, even though their overall philosophy denies that thing could be there. Spencer, please.
For this, you put believer in the box. Is that supposed to be atheist or in a...
I put here beliefs. I'm sorry. Not
okay.
believer, beliefs. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. In other words, everybody has beliefs. Everybody is human. This is Schaeffer's whole deal. Oh, sorry, holding him back a year. And said, thought he was going to Whitworth next year, but yeah. There we are. So what Shaeffer says is, everybody is made in the image of God. Everybody has a little bit of common grace in them. Everybody has a little of God's truth in them. It is there. And he furthermore says that's the only thing that keeps them getting out of bed in the morning. That's the thing that finally is the only thing that will give them any sense of stability and humanity. And the problem is, if you put it under analysis, you'll see that whatever that thing is that they cling to, it cannot live compatibly with the godless philosophy they've otherwise embraced. So they are selective in their atheism. They're atheistic, when they're talking to a Christian apologist, but then they go back and cling to this thing that gives them meaning all the rest of the time. Talk to someone who's a, environmentalist, or say an animal rights person, animal rights, or some such thing. You say, wait a minute, you think it really matters to take care of the environment? Oh yeah, that's the most important thing. That's what we've got to take care of the environment. And why do we need to do that? Well, because we need to survive as a species. Who gives a rip whether we survive as a species? Well, what do you mean, who gives a rip if we survive? I mean, that's important. Why is that important? I mean, you have already told me that the only reason we're here is because of a complete fluke. There's a random accident. Who cares? Who cares whether we survive as a species, You get all frustrated with, you can always tell when you've hit kind of the core of the matter when they start getting mad. That's always you're an atheist and you say, you know, my atheism says that I'm the only thing in the universe that matters. I'm going to live for me. I'm going to live for my concerns. I'm not going to have any interest in the welfare of anybody else. It's all me. That's what my survival of the fittest. I'm the fittest. I'm here. I'm going to push everybody else out of the way who gets in my way, and that's what my atheism says to me. You'll find that most atheists will not support you in that. You know? Why not? Because something in them wants to believe that there's a better way, but that better way doesn't square with their own atheism. It really is a little deposit of Christian truth in there. And that's what they're clinging to. And so Shaeffer says you have to find that. It is a little bit of a common ground. You see, that's the evidentialism in it. You are finding common ground in the pagan. It is there. It's there because it got slipped in the back door by God. And every human being's got it. Every human being lives for something. And if they were really consistent, they live for nothing. And so he wants to show that even though they are denying a belief in God, there's a little evidence in them of God, and you can lead them based on that common ground, you know, back to that which must be there to give any meaning to it. Does that make sense? That's kind of his approach. He uses it with great effect. Avery, does that kind of, does the, go ahead, Sean.
Well, what if, I realize most people probably do contradict themselves, but for somebody like Nietzsche,
Yeah.
it seems like he's pretty consistent with
Even Nietzsche.
what he
In
is.
fact, Shaeffer likes to use Nietzsche as an example. Because you remember, what was probably the critical moment, very dramatic moment in Nietzsche's personal life, which really was the moment that he sort of began spinning into his insanity. And it was, Ben?
Well, that was when he was overcome with pity for the horse that was being missed. Right.
Nietzsche was always angry with himself at the degree to which he himself was victimized by his own feelings of pity. It began back in the 1860s when he was a medic in the Franco-Prussian War, which was just a little war. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. His sister, that is Nietzsche's sister, his name was what, Elizabeth? Was it Elizabeth, I think? Said of the war, oh, it's just a merry little war, you know. Nietzsche, however, was out on the battlefield. And he would go from one wounded soldier to another. And he'd hear the cries and the grief. Am I going to make it, Doc? You know, and these poor guys out there bleeding to death, dismembered, whatever. I mean, it's awful, you know. And Nietzsche wept. And he was so angry with himself because he was an atheist. And he thought to himself, why in the world am I so moved by grief at these people which have no more meaning than I do? And the whole thing's meaningless. And yet he was overcome in his own grief. And you know, really, Shaeffer likes to point that out. And the moment that was most dramatic is when he was walking down the street, and this is what Ben alluded to, and he saw a guy whipping his horse because his horse was, you know, recalcitrant. And Nietzsche goes running across the street, grabs the horse around the neck, and sobbing on the neck of this horse, hugging him, says, my brother, you know. And it was a few days later they had to institutionalize him. And some people think it was just some people think it was syphilis, I don't know, but some people think it was just the fact that he himself was so, you know, unable to live with the implications of his own philosophy, because he himself was so filled with that feeling of pity. And pity makes no sense, does? Pity makes no sense. If you are an atheist, there is no place for pity, period. There's no place for love. So even though Nietzsche is a great example of it, I think he kind of illustrates it both ways. All right, so anyway, that's the idea. Shaeffer does it to very good effect, by the way. He's really good at this. Yeah.
Couldn't an atheist say that we get feelings from just our just chemical reactions or
Yeah.
just our biology?
Yeah, that's what they would say.
Okay, so then there wouldn't be a place for, what do you mean by, for an atheist, there wouldn't be a place for pity or love or, you know, the
Well, yeah, it's like you could, an atheist might say that, well, this is just a chemical reaction within me. And even an atheist, while they would make that argument to you to try to avoid the bullet of your argument to them, doesn't really believe it. You know, somewhere inside us, we really don't believe that our affection, our love, our lifelong loyalty to, and willingness to care for and cherish another person is just a chemical reaction. Something in us rebels against that, even though an atheist will maybe maintain it, you know. And the part of what drives that is you know, the atheist may say that to me, and I may say to the atheist, well, you know, the chemical reaction that's going on in me, which obviously is equally valid to the one that's going on in you, says that I should blow your brains out right now, and I should go home and take everything you've got and head to Mexico, and you know, and so why not? And who says which is best? You've got your chemical reaction, I've got mine. My chemical reaction says I should opportunistically destroy yours, and you know, you see what I'm saying? And even the atheist wants the chemical reaction going on in him to be universalized a little bit. He wants to make more of it than just his private little arbitrary, you know, feelings about something in his life. Yeah.
So then could you just say that for the atheist, his emotions, like you said, just become arbitrary and meaningless because they're just victims to whatever they're.
I think that's what does happen.
So
Yeah.
it just loses like meaning and purpose to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is what my friend was trying to say to me. Yeah, I love my wife. It's just a chemical reaction. I'm like, come on, man. You don't really mean that, do you? And you know, as soon as they're at least but honest, they do. No, it's more than that. It's more than just. That would be the same thing as saying your love for your wife is about the same in significance as taking some soda and stirring it into water, and you get. There you go. You know, that's what your love for your wife is, your kids, and then it's gone. A little fizz. Even an atheist, you know, something in us cries out for meaning. We want our lives to be meaningful. And even the atheist is going to devote his or her life to something and make it a God. And that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for, where is the God? Maybe it's global warming. Okay, fine, I can work with that. What's so bad about global warming, you know? Oh, well, it's going to destroy the environment. Well, who gives a rip? You know, who cares? You know, planet Earth is one little speck of dust that's going to burn out soon. Who cares whether, you know, the Earth is swamp? Big deal. Now, that's what the atheist ought to be saying. I don't give a rip. Oh, so it's global warming. Big deal. Let's eat, drink, and be. We're going to be dead tomorrow anyway. You know? You see, but the atheists won't do that. They want to stand up for human rights, whales' rights, this or that, environmental, whatever. I mean, give me a break. If you're an atheist, why do you even care about whales? Who cares? Let's kill them. What is this? What is this religion that you create within yourself by which you try to replace, you know, the inevitable effects of your own atheism? I think I told you the other day, when Shaeffer first started doing this, he did it with a vengeance. He was very good at it. And he had one person, after he'd sort of beat up on them a little bit, go out and commit suicide. He took note to self. You have to be careful with these people, you know. They are more precarious than you think. I mean, really. It's the Christian who has some kind of foundation for life. The atheist is floating in a vacuum. And so beneath their very, kind of confident, arrogant veneer that they try to project, they've got it all figured out, you've got to realize there's a very frightened person in there because they are alone in the universe. And that's a scary thing. And they create something to try to give a sense of meaning. Oh, let's save the whales. Something to put meaning where there's a vacuum. That's all you got to find. Maybe it's whales. Okay, man. Let's talk about whales. See, in other words, your response, if you're going to use Schaeffer's approach, is not to disparage that. Oh, that's dumb. But okay, let's talk about whales. That becomes our common ground. Because I tell you, it's only the Christian that has a good reason to be concerned about whales. Only the Christian. The atheist has no good reason to be worried about whales, or global warming, or any other thing. Only the Christian has a good reason to be concerned about the environment. So anyway, that's his approach. I think it's pretty good. You have to say, when I find myself in conversations, which I occasionally do with people who are not believers, I tend to go to the Shaeffer approach every day of the week. It gets you past a lot of stuff. I have to agree, this can get you into kind of all sorts of deep weeds, well, what about first cause and all of this stuff? And, I think it all works. I think the evidential arguments work, but I'm not sure they're effective. But I have to say, a thoroughgoing presuppositional approach leaves me a little cold too. I think there's a place for both that a good apologist can use to great effect. Jason.
So had nobody really advocated this kind of approach before Shaeffer?
Not really in the way that he does it. I think certainly you find, Calvin talks about how godless people nevertheless pay some kind of tribute to the God they don't believe in. Calvin does that, Luther does it to some extent, but Schaeffer's the first guy that really, I think, works it out in a way that is as thorough, I guess I'd say, as he does.
So, because it seems to me like that's pretty much the most intuitive way to do it.
You would think so,
Maybe
and I thought so once I heard it, but I'm not sure. It is, once you hear it, you think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm afraid the intuitive approach, I think, that many people fall into is just whose argument is better than the other guy's, or what part of first cause don't you get, or something like that. You see, and this is a little different from that because it really is trying to find in that person where they are a little microscopic Christian, and I'm sure it'd been there in other thinkers in church history, but Schaeffer's the one that more or less gave it wheels. Maybe.
How would Shaeffer argue with someone who really doesn't care about anything, so a hedonist who really just wants to live for himself because they don't care about anything, so it's hard
Well, he would find the thing that they care about. That's the whole point. Somebody comes along and says, I don't care about anything. Well, you just have a conversation with them. And remarkably enough, it's you can always find the thing they care about. People care. They may say that, and certainly they will say that if they're trying to avoid the force of your Christian apologetics. Oh, I don't care about anything. But the fact is, everybody cares about something. They do. And so that's what Shaeffer would say. He would say, well, they may say that, but it just isn't the truth. And if you'll spend a little time and thoughtful conversation, you'll find what they care about. Yeah. And maybe it's whales, maybe it's, maybe it's, who knows, it may be something that to you doesn't seem like it's worth caring about, but that's okay. You find something that really is is at the heart of their life, something they're worried about. And I think you'll usually find it. Somebody who really truly doesn't care about anything, really truly doesn't, is usually plotting their own suicide. You know, because we just can't tolerate living in a completely meaningless existence. And even suicide, in some ways, is driven by the fact that I care about something. Stephen.
I was wondering, did Shaeffer ever talk about how somebody would use this approach with a religion like Islam, which is similar to Christianity in some respects? Because I couldn't exactly see like where because Islam is so similar to Christianity, I'm sure that an Islam person would agree with a lot of what a Christian would say is like a point of agreement, but I was kind of wondering how you would address the points of disagreement.
Yeah, if you're dealing with people in any kind of religious scheme, whether it's Islam or whether it's Hinduism or Scientology, or something, I think he would say the same thing holds true. That God has planted in them something that really doesn't quite square with their own outlook. It's often, it's been, I remember when Doug Wilson spoke on Islam here a few years ago, he said Islam gives us a God who is a hermit, an ultimate hermit. This hard monotheistic God, in the Islamic conception of things, was alone. And where do you find any place for love with a single being, one being? In other words, Trinity is a deep mystery on the one hand, but it solves so many problems on the other. It creates community, it creates love, it creates relationship, it answers the problem of the one and the many. I mean, so many philosophical problems are solved by something that is in itself fundamentally mysterious. That's been kind of Christianity's great robust power, and I think that's the kind of thing you do. It could be more difficult. In some ways, dealing with an atheist is a little more straightforward, whereas someone that has some conception of God or multiple gods, you have to do a little bit more thoughtful, interrogation about it. But I think he would stay, about the same thing.